As you reach some of these more advanced methods in the silly-string class, sometimes it can be hard to imagine how do I make use of methods that I've already written to build more advanced methods that take for granted the fact that we've already got the ability to ask a silly string for a piece of it or to concatenate two silly strings together. So in this video, we're going to work through an example where we add a new method to the silly string class called coupleName. This isn't a method that you need to add, but it's a fun little one that shows you some things that will be useful to you when you get to splice, and perhaps in other places as well. So the point of this method is to take two silly strings, and these silly strings we can imagine having people's names in them, like Kim K and Kanye. And our goal here is to take the first half of the first name and the second half of the last name, or of the second name, and join them together. So here we're setting up a variable A that is a silly string, and its characters are Kim K. We're setting up a variable B, it's a silly string, and its characters are Kanye. C is going to be the result of saying A, I'm going to call your couple name with B. All right, and so we expect to get Kanye, which I know isn't actually their couple name, but just bear with me here. All right, and so the idea here is we're going to take the first half of the very first name, A, which is the method, which is the object we're calling the couple name method on. So that's Ki, and then we're going to join it with the second half of the second name that we're giving to the couple name method as an argument. And that is Kanye, or Nye is the back half of Kanye. So we expect to get Kanye out. When we run this right now, what happens? Well, we get null because our couple name method does not return anything. Remember, when we call this method, we are calling it with A's fields. So once we reach the couple name method, chars will be A's characters, which are Kim K. And then other is going to be a silly string object, which is Kanye. So one way of imagining how this might look in a visual way is are these two objects right here. So A, in the context of this method, will be this. All right, so whenever we refer to this, once we are inside of the couple name method, it will refer to A. And once we are inside of the couple name method B, will actually be referred to as other because it has been assigned to the other parameter. And so our goal then is to take the first half of A and the back half of B and join them into a new array C. And then we will use that array C to make a silly string object. But it turns out we already know how to take substrings from one string and from another string, right? We have previously written the substring method earlier in this assignment. So wouldn't it be nice if we could just take the first half using substring of the first string and the second half of the second string using substring, and then concatenate those two together? We've also written a concatenate method. So how can we make use of these methods that we've written before? The first thing that we need to figure out is where do we stop? What are our indices here? So we know that on the first name, we're going to start from 0 and we're going to end at this dot size, which tells us how big an array is divided by 2, all right? Because size is going to be 4, we're going to stop at 2 when we use the substring method. So if we then say this dot substring with starting index of 0 and an ending index of 2, and remember, we're not going to actually include the ending index when we use our substring method. We go up to the character before it. That should give us the first half of the first name. We can refer to the current object we're working with in the couple name class using the this dot operator. And if you don't quite remember what that means, but saying, hey call my substring method, and here are the arguments I want, 0 and 2. This is a lot like the example in class where we learned how to do push-ups by calling lower and push on the same object to make a push-up method, and then making a do push-ups method, which allowed you to do multiple push-ups. We can also ask other for its size and divide that result by 2 and that will give us the starting index, right? So here, when we have an odd number of characters for this little silly method, we'll just assume that we start right in the middle. So when we divide 5 by 2 with integer division, that will give us 2 back, so that's where we'll start. And so the way that we can get this substring is we will say other dot substring. So we're calling this the substring method on the other object, which is B, or the Kanye object. And we are going to start from, I'm just going to draw an arrow up to there, and we're going to end at, where do we end? So this B is a silly string that has 5 characters in it. So we want to end at the 5th index, or we want to end at the size of B. So we can just say, hey, B, actually, it's not B inside of this method. Oh no, things are going horribly wrong here. It's not B inside of this method, it's actually other, right? So when we're referring to this inside of the method, this will be other, and we'll say other dot size. So let's actually put this in code, because we've now written off the screen here. So the first thing that we need to do, remember, is this refers to Kim K, and I'm going to make a note of this in my current sort of authoring of this method, and then we'll get rid of these notes when we're done because we don't know what these variables are going to refer to. But remember, this is going to refer to the object that couple name was called on, and other refers to Kanye. Okay, so the first thing we need to do are sort of calculate those indices of where do we end the first string and where do we start the second. So I'm going to set up some variables to keep track of these. Int end first. So this will be the end of the first string. And what we want to say is this dot size divided by 2. So this will give us the middle index of the first array, of the first silly string. And then we will say int start second is, this is not this dot size anymore, right? Because this dot refers to me, it's other's size. So how many characters does the other silly string have? Divided by 2. All right, so that will tell us in Kanye, remember that's 5. We divide 5 by 2, we get 2 back. So our starting index will be this n, okay? And so now we've got our indices with where we want to start and end. Why don't we pull out those words by using the substring method? So I'm going to make 2 more variables, and that will hold the first half of the first word, or this object, and the second half of the other object. So here I'll say silly string first half is assigned this dot substring. And we're going to start from 0, right, from the beginning of the first name, which is Kim K, and we're going to go to the end of the end index of end first, right? So that is where we wanted to stop this particular substring. So we've got now, this will give us back the first half of the first name, and let's do the same thing with the other name. So silly string second half is assigned this dot. And again, I made this mistake because I was kind of just blindly going off of the line right above it. But we're not referring to this dot for the second half. We're not referring to the object this method got called on. We need to be looking at the other parameter, because other is where we're getting the second half of this name. And this is where Kanye is coming from. So we're going to say other dot substring. And where we're starting from is in the middle. So we just figured out that the start second variable is here, start second. That's the start of our second word. And our end is going to be the very end of this second string, which will be other dot size. All right, and so notice that we're calling substring on the current object that we call this method on to get the first half of the name. And for the second half of the name, which is coming from the other parameter, we're calling substring on it and using different indices. So this will give us the first half of Kim K and the second half of Kanye. And now what we need to do is concatenate these two together. So we'll set up a new variable, silly string result is assigned first half dot concatenate second half. All right, And so you've previously written the concatenate method. This takes two silly strings and joins them together to give you a new resulting silly string. And we're storing that in the result. And then all we need to do is return result. All right, and so we've broken this down into a few steps. First, we calculated what are the indices that we're going to start and end at. Then we looked at how do we pull out the substring of the first name and the second name, and then we concatenated them together and we returned the resulting silly string. So let's see if this works. I'm going to save my file here and run it. And what do you know? We actually get the same name, Kinye. We can try this with some different variables instead. So now if I said something like Chris and Carol, even though, so let's see, what do we expect here? We expect KR to be the first half of Chris and ROL. Oh no, we're going to have a terrible child's name, Kroll. I don't think it's going to work. But sure enough, the method still works. Unfortunately, I don't think that'll work with Carol. It's a horrible name. So that's one way of sort of thinking about how do you reuse methods that you've already written. And so notice that these are going to go off and call your code that you've previously written and make reuse of it. And this is what we call composition. We're composing new behaviors by making use of behaviors that we've already implemented. I'm about to show you one more optimization that can clean up your code just a little bit, okay? For this next one, note that these transformations that I'm going to make have no impact on the code, but I want to show you some of the power and flexibility of expressions. So earlier in the semester, we learned that expressions, where you have an expression of one type, you can substitute that expression with any other expression of the same type. Here we've got a variable reference, return result. That variable reference is an expression. Its type is silly string. All right, so we have to return a silly string because we declared that this method is going to return a silly string. So this expression here must be of type silly string. And so it's a variable reference to the result variable. The result variable is type silly string. So anything that gives us back a silly string, we can put here. Well, turns out this this assignment statement, it requires a type silly string on this side, on the assignment side of the assignment operation. So we know that first half.concatenate returns to us a silly string as well. In fact, we can look at its method signature and see that it's going to give us back a silly string. So we don't actually have to store the result of this concatenation operation in a variable. We can use this expression and return it directly. All right. And so now we've got something that's a little bit more concise. We didn't set up an unnecessary variable. What you're about to see is we can continue doing this if we'd like. And let's see. So we've got two variable references here. Both are type silly string. The actual value of this is being pulled from here, right? So first half is being assigned the result of calling this dot substring. So we could just take this dot substring and replace it with first half down here. And this is where it starts to be a little bit mind-blowing, but if you slow down and think about it just for a sec, here we're saying, hey, I'm calling the substring method on this, here are my arguments. When this method returns, we've got a new silly string object that we're working with. Now we're going to take that silly string object and call concatenate on it. Right? And so here we're going to concatenate onto the end of this first substring operation, the second. And you could continue doing this. Although actually, I think at some point, the benefits of this start to go away because you start getting this really long string of code that is hard to follow, right? Like this is pretty hard to read. And so I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking this all the way down, right? Because we could continue doing this to the point of getting to a very single line of code that implements this entire method, right? So here is a single return statement that does all of those calculations that we needed in the middle in one single return statement. But it's pretty ugly. It's pretty hard to read. And so some of this becomes, as you get more comfortable with programming, a matter of style and preferences. And so what I would encourage you to do is in the early days, make liberal use of variables to store your intermediate results so that you have names for the ideas that you're trying to express. So here we're putting a name on the first half of the string, we're putting a name on the second half of the string, and then we're just returning some result. In this video, hopefully you got a sense of how you can use this dot to call a method on the same object, and how that's different from calling a method on another object, and how we can play around with expressions a little bit